The only way for me to come back is as EGOVELI. What up, Fight World? It's your boy Ego, and I'm back with some more boxing. Now it is time to fully chop up the Gennady Golovkin and no guys versus Kell Brook fight. I did a quick video just announcing the fight. Now I want to give my pure, unadulterated, uncut, raw thoughts. A lot of people hit me up. My writer hit me up. He was on point. He was the first one to notify me. I woke up and he was like, "Did you hear about this? Triple G versus Kell Brook," right? So shout out to my dude Bakari. And the fight took the boxing world by surprise, by storm. Not necessarily in a good way. Very eerily similar to Canelo versus Khan. When it was announced, people knew both names, but it was just like a shocking pairing. People were asking when I put it on my Instagram with 30,000 plus followers, is this a joke? Is this a meme? Is this real? Right? But it is absolutely real. You go to Matchroom Boxing, who promotes Kell Brook. They put the cover art, the flyer for it. You go to HBO Boxing. This is their verified account. And you go down and they retweeted Kell Brook and they retweeted Gennady Golovkin. Golovkin said it himself on this. Let's click on it. It's official. I'll be facing off against Kell Brook September 10th in London, ready for my first UK fight. Golovkin's verified account. So it is absolutely real. Now let me dissect this. Not a fan of the fight. I think for a few reasons. I'm going to break it down. Again, if you are just an extreme fan, you're not willing to be objective, you're just an extreme fan of either fighter or whatever, HBO, then you're not going to like this video and you might as well click off of it because I'm going to give my real thoughts. The reason I don't like the fight, first and foremost, I think Paulie Malignaggi said it best. Weight classes are not being respected in boxing. This is starting to remind me of a circus, of WWE, if you will. One day, Hulk Hogan is a good guy and everybody loves him. He has the yellow wife beater on. Yeah, it's Hogan. Then the next day, he dyes his beard and has a handlebar mustache. Like, what is this? Is Hogan a bad guy? And all of a sudden, he's Hollywood Hogan. And everybody hates him. And it's the NWO and this and that. That's what it's reminding me of. The weight classes in boxing are not being respected. People are acting like this is fight night. Like this is a video game. And you can't play boxing and it's not a video game. And I like both fighters, Golovkin and Kell Brook. But it doesn't make sense. You look at it, they were both in negotiations with other options. Jesse Vargas for Kell Brook in a unification and Golovkin versus Chris Eubank Jr. Now, speaking of Chris Eubank Jr., let me talk about that. There's some controversy saying he ducked the fight, this and that. I went to his Instagram and this is what he says. "I haven't been shown one contract since my fight with Triple G was announced. I'm still ready and waiting to sign. Fighting Brook is a joke, hashtag too small." And this is the biggest problem that I have with this fight, is Kell Brook is jumping up 2 weight classes. And this is starting to become, it seems like a pattern in boxing where, oh, I'm daring to be great. Yeah. But you look throughout history, there's a lot of people that have been daring to be great, but you still got to be reasonable and you still got to be sensible. Yes, people want to see Gennady Golovkin step up in competition. Yes, people wanted to see Kell Brook step back up in competition because since Sean Porter, he hasn't fought no one like a Sean Porter. He's been fighting mandatories and Jojo Dan and guys that lost to Jojo Dan like Kevin Bezier and Frankie Gavin. So we did want that, but not necessarily like this because this doesn't really make sense. And it creates that ripple in the pond. There are a bountiful, plenty amount of options for Kell Brook at welterweight. Errol Spence Jr., who's been fighting to get his placement to fight for the IBF belt, right? There's fights with Danny Garcia. Keith Thurman looked brilliant. Well, he had a tough fight, but he etched it out or whatever versus Sean Porter. There's a Sean Porter rematch. Great fights at welterweight for Kell Brook, right? So it doesn't make sense for him to do this because like I made the 7 reasons video for Khan versus Canelo and told you why that shouldn't happen. This is very similar, very, very similar. Now, the only difference is people are like, oh, but Kell Brook, he's an undefeated champion and he has a better chin than Khan. I mean, that could be true, but you look at it, Khan had to move up to Canelo weight and he was fighting at 47. So realistically, even though it was for middleweight titles, Khan moved about 1 division because 1 pound, that's 1 pound away from junior middleweight, right? 1 pound. So realistically, Khan moved 1.5 divisions, if you will. Kell Brook is jumping a full 2 weight divisions. He's bypassing 154 and he's landing at 160, right? So that's a completely different, that, you know what I mean? To me, that's equivalent. That, to me, that's really equivalent. Yes, he has a better chin. That's cool. I can agree with that. But for the same reasons I didn't condone Canelo facing Khan, 7 reasons Canelo versus Khan should not happen next. 5 months ago, 67,000 views. It's very similar why I'm not in favor of this fight. Now, let's look at the Chris Eubank situation again, EGOVELI style, because still I rise. People are saying he ducked the fight. He's a middleweight. He was talking a good game about wanting to fight Golovkin. This is a more suitable fight to me because you look at Chris Eubank, he's clearly in shape. He's a middleweight. He's a record of 23-1, and that one loss was to Billy Joe Saunders. Some people even contest that, right? But he's a full-fledged middleweight. Now, this is the other thing that is troublesome for a guy like Gennady Golovkin, because people are blaming Chris Eubank for the fight not happening, which I'm going to further expand on and get into. Is it shoots holes into what Team Triple G has been saying throughout their history and their reign in the U.S. Triple G said things like, "Oh, I want all the belts at middleweight division." He actually has a belt. It's like a British belt, but he has a belt, right? His pops is a legend, Chris Eubank Sr. And this fight, for whatever reason, doesn't happen. And within 48 hours, you rush and fight Kell Brook, a welterweight, who does have a belt, but that belt is at 147, right? So that's completely different. Kell Brook doesn't really have nothing to offer you. I'm not giving Golovkin credit if he does what he's supposed to do against a guy jumping up 2 weight divisions. It's just, that's not how boxing should work. I mean, Golovkin's supposed to be this powerhouse, and to fight a welterweight just makes no sense. Now, let's talk about the Chris Eubank situation a little bit more in detail. Some people are saying he ducked, and Chris Eubank Sr. and Jr., they priced themselves out. But he just said right here on the caption, "I'm still ready and waiting to sign, but I guarantee you they won't call his bluff," because basically Hearn, Matchroom, they got what they wanted. This is what they wanted eventually. And a lot of people, if you've never been around street stuff or you don't have street smarts, you might not be able to see the signs. To me, this sounds fabricated, what Eddie Hearn is saying, like, "Oh, we told Chris Eubank Jr. and Sr. they had an ultimatum, give me an answer at 5 p.m. and then if you don't, then we're looking at other options." Now, that could be true. You know what I mean? I don't know behind closed doors what happened. Maybe some people are difficult to negotiate with, so that could be true. But there had to be some kind of underlying notion in this whole process, because I know a thing or two about the business, and the bottom line is it is improbable to think that, let's say a day or two ago, Eddie Hearn gave the Eubanks this ultimatum: "Hey, by 5 p.m., let me know, and if you don't, then we're looking at other options," right? And he didn't hear from him by 5 p.m. All of a sudden, he calls Kell Brook, who's supposed to be in negotiations with Jesse Vargas, and Kell Brook's like, "Yeah, you know what? I want to fight Triple G. I want to move up 2 weight divisions and fight Triple G." And they get this approved through HBO, because anything that airs on HBO, they have to consent to. They're not going to just put something on their network. That's why when you look at fights like Golovkin versus Adama, Golovkin versus Shida, HBO didn't pick that up because they didn't really want that. They didn't see the value for their network. So not only that, it's a fight with the domestic and international type of fan. Like, you have to look at HBO, you have to look at Sky Sports. So it's a little bit harder because it's a UK demographic, because in the UK it's going to be pay-per-view and it's going to be on regular HBO. So within 2 days or a day, whatever Eddie Hearn's claiming, since 5 p.m., you just immediately call Kell Brook at 5:30, right? And said, "Hey, what about Golovkin? You should fight him," without ever having spoken to him about. That doesn't make sense to me. And in addition, you gotta look at stuff. The graphics were made. I mean, this was the deal alone. That's why this and the Jesse Vargas fight was stalling out, and this is why the Chris Eubank fight was stalling out. You guys can believe whatever you want. I believe what I believe. And the reason being is because, like I said, these things take time. I do Photoshop to make graphics and get the approval of Sky Sports and HBO, get everyone's buy-in in the time frame that Eddie Hearn is suggesting. Sounds ridiculous. So to me, this man was always being etched out of the picture. They looked at Kell Brook as maybe a bigger UK option, bigger money, and maybe even a bigger threat than Eubank, because Eubank is a legit middleweight in shape and stuff like that. And they put this out to the public like, oh, he's ducking us. Where's your pin? I mean, to me, that sound, the fact you could always tell, because that sounds like they were trying to plant the seed early. I did a video about it, like, oh, where Triple G says, where's your pin? And then 2 days later, the whole world is shocked because it's Triple G Kell Brook. Kell Brook, people have been asking for him to step up since Sean Porter, right? And a lot of deals fell through. Even before that, Devin Alexander fell through 3 times. 2 of them was on behalf of Kell Brook pulling out, right? And also guys like Brandon Rios, Diego Chavez. There was deals and discrepancies. Brandon Rios with the gloves and how much Jesse Vargas was getting paid. Diego Chavez fell apart. All these fights fell apart, but miraculously, in 2 days, there's a mega fight between Kell Brook, a welterweight, and Golovkin just sitting there in the pocket. I don't believe that. So to me, there's some backstory where the deal was to etch him out of the picture. You guys can believe whatever you want, but the writing's on the wall. You don't just get the approval and consent of HBO, Sky Sports, have graphics made, all in this time frame that Eddie Hearn is talking about in this interview. I don't think that's logical to think that. That's just my personal opinion. So you guys can believe whatever you want. And my dude Dante's Boxing Nation did an interview with Abel. They said, oh, we had to preserve this date. Golovkin needs to fight, and we couldn't get Eubanks on board or whatever. So we just took that. Now, the reason the main reason is weight classes aren't being respected at all. I'm about meaningful fights. If it's going to be a fight of this magnitude, Kell Brook is a rising star. Why create that ripple in the pond and jump 2 weight divisions to fight Golovkin? And Golovkin, some people, oh, he has no options. Another thing with the Golovkin situation, Golovkin, to me, this has proved to me that he is not the most avoided man in boxing. Some people fear him. There are people who have ducked a fight or not been in a rush to fight him. But there's no way you could convince me that none of these top Danny Jacobs, Billy Joe Saunders, and everybody else is willing to fight this man, Gennady Golovkin. But you can get Adama, the Adamas of the world, the Gabe Rosado. Gabe Rosado was a mandatory just for a quick boxing history lesson. Gabe Rosado, I believe the IBF route was the mandatory for Cornelius K9 Bundrich at that time. He moved up. They were supposed to fight at a catchweight. Rosado, being a tough Philly warrior, said, you know what? I don't believe in catchweights. I'm not doing it because I want no excuses when I beat Golovkin, which didn't happen, but he decided to fight him at the full 160. So you can't convince me that guys that are willing to do these bold moves like Gabe Rosado, not fight him at a catchweight, even though that was the deal, is to fight him at the catchweight of 150, whatever, 157 or something like that, right? And that's another discrepancy we'll get to, which is catchweights, Canelo, who you want to fight, lower than 160, who you don't want to fight. We'll get to that. But you can't tell me Adamas and Willie Monroe Jr. with 6 knockouts, and now a welterweight is willing to fight this man, Gennady Golovkin, but all these other people aren't. If you could get a welterweight in there with an undefeated record, who has a career and a championship at welterweight that he is now risking, and what I mean by risking is, yeah, he could drop back down. One, that's not necessarily advisable to jump up 2 weight classes and immediately jump back down. We've seen guys like Roy Jones Jr. who tried to fluctuate their body and just do whatever. Kell Brook is not the freshest spring chicken. He's not old, but I mean, it's not necessarily good for your body, especially if Gennady Golovkin knocks you out. You know what I'm saying? If he knocks you out, there's a strong possibility, because actual middleweights aren't taking his power. You know what I mean? So you have to consider the possibility that Kell Brook could get knocked out. So he's going to jump back down to 47. You know what I'm saying? It just doesn't make sense. And there's no way anybody in the comment section or anything can convince me that you could get a welterweight with the name, with healthy options at 147, possibly even 54 if he can't make weight anymore or whatever the situation, and he's willing to jump 2 weight divisions to fight the monster. So obviously the pot of gold was worth it for Kell Brook, and these fighters are getting to a point where they're willing to risk their bodies and their health and their resumes to make this large sum sum of money. You know what I mean? And I'm not doubt. Maybe these guys are just warriors and they feel they can win, but it just this fight doesn't make sense. Now let's take a look at the hypocrisy. The hypocrisy, very easy. It's very clear. It's very blatant. But a lot of the Triple G apologists who are going to support anything no matter what he does are going to clearly be okay with it. But let me talk about the hypocrisies that I see. Now, Team Triple G was very vocal about putting the pressure on Canelo. And I agreed with it. A lot what they were doing, the give me the belts, and I don't want to fight at a catch weight. And I made videos supporting that. But I call it like I see, and I'm real in all situations, despite who likes it. And what they did for Canelo is not making sense now, because they condemned Canelo fighting Khan, Triple G, Abel, I'm sure Tom, all of them. And Triple G was saying things like, oh no, he's a middleweight, Khan not middleweight. It's bad for the division, bad look for boxing, and all this and that. And then you do virtually the same thing. Now, the only saving grace is Khan had defeats and Kell Brook is undefeated, and most people would probably say Kell Brook has a better chin. But it still averages out to about the same thing, because Kell Brook is jumping the full 160 and Khan jumped 1 pound over junior middleweight, which was technically 155. It was technically middleweight, but it was really about a pound. It was about a division jump, a division and a half, if you will. So it's about the average. It averages the same thing to me, because Kell Brook is making the full plunge to 160. And a lot of people are going to say, but Kell Brook, his walking around weight is 160 plus. And there's a difference. I talk to guys in the gym all the time. Fighting, sparring, walk around weight. Because, correct me if I'm wrong, if you're walking around, you don't just have vicious punchers punching you in the face. Like if you're just going to the bodega, going to the store, you could walk around at 170, but you don't have Kovalev just walking up and punching you in the face. So walking around weight, who cares? Like that, I mean, that's something that shows your body type or whatever, but it's different when you're in the ring with that. I know people that spar at heavier weights. I'm sure Amir Khan has sparred at weights heavier. I mean, it's very customary to spar at weights heavier than what you're fighting at. But what happens when he gets in there with big punchers at 135, 147, 140, things like that? Yeah, I mean, he gets buckled, maybe even stopped. So I don't care about walking around. Yeah, he's a big welterweight. It's about acclimating, and Kell Brook hasn't done that. So to me, why would I give the guy who's perceived as the best middleweight in the world credit for beating a guy? You guys seen the clip at the beginning. We asked Gennady Golovkin after his fight with Dominic Wade, great performance, the crowd went wild, what do you think about Kell Brook? Oh no, Kell Brook, he's too small. He's too small, so why are you fighting Mr. Too Small? There is no justification for that. You know what I mean? You can say whatever you want. The rest of the video, you can pause it, you can leave hate comments, but the man himself, the powerhouse, Gennady Golovkin, says, no, I believe Kell Brook, he's too small. He said it, not me. Don't get mad at me. He said he was too small. So for me to have a problem with this fight makes perfect sense, because the man himself, the middleweight champion, undefeated, he said that Kell Brook was too small. So the walking around, I don't buy the walking around weight stuff, because again, it's different. When you're walking around, you're not getting punched in the face by a champion with a amateur pedigree like a Golovkin. You know what I mean? So who cares what you're walking around per se? I have not seen Kell Brook compete at a high level in the ring as a pro above 147. And not to mention, since Sean Porter, I haven't even seen him fight a world-class, world-level opponent. A guy that was favored, or people or fans would even consider being able to beat him. Like a Keith Thurman, an Errol Spence Jr., a Sean Porter rematch, because it looks like Sean Porter learned from the Brook loss. Any fight like that. Pacquiao, Mayweather, any of those fights. I didn't see it. Danny Garcia, I didn't see that. Since Sean Porter, I've not seen him fight someone as good as Sean Porter. So I can't give credit to that. You know what I mean? It makes absolutely no sense. You guys can say, oh, he walks around. I don't care about that. Like, that's very, we haven't seen him fight. He hasn't even cleaned out his own division of 147, and he could do more there. So why would I want to see him fight at middleweight? I don't even know if who he could beat at 154, to be honest. There's killers from 147 to 154. There are certified killers. Can Kell Brook beat a Edislandi Lara? Can Kell Brook beat Demetrius Andrade? Can Kell Brook beat Canelo? Can Kell Brook beat Charlo, the better Charlo? We don't know these things, let alone, it's not even just a Gennady Golovkin thing. It's the weights aren't being respected. Because if Kell Brook moved 2 divisions to fight Danny Jacobs, to fight David Lemieux doesn't necessarily have the most finesse, but he could crack. So I don't know if Kell Brook could beat a David Lemieux. So it's not even just a singling out Golovkin thing. I don't know who Kell Brook could beat at middleweight because he hasn't acclimated to that. You know what I'm saying? I don't know if he could beat a Danny Jacobs or Curtis Stevens. We don't really know those things until they get in the ring. And this is the thing. When you're talking to people who know boxing, like, you're not going to be able to pull the wool over my eyes because I study the game. I'm a student of the sport. People keep referencing, oh, Roberto Duran, he was at lightweight, and then he moved up to middleweight. Like, you know what I'm saying? Okay, what happened? He moved up to middleweight and lost to Marvin Hagler. He moved up in weight and fought guys like Thomas Hearn and got stopped. And you could pick out through history, there's been some great fighters and great anomalies, Pacquiao being one of them. He moved up 2 weight divisions, beat Oscar De La Hoya. Oscar De La Hoya, you have to look at the full spectrum. De La Hoya was late in his career. He had wars with like the Mayorgas, Vargas, guys like Tito Trinidad. He had been in the ring with those Mosleys twice. He had just gotten stopped by Bernard Hopkins. So when you factor everything in, De La Hoya was at the end of his career, which is why he retired after the Pacquiao fight. He got stopped. Why didn't he retire after Bernard Hopkins stopped him? Because he thought he had more in the tank. But then he fought Pacquiao, dropped down in weight. He dropped a weight class, and Pacquiao jumped up to. Pacquiao was much fresher because it had been a long time removed from his early losses in his career, and Pacquiao beat him. Pacquiao is still also an anomaly who is a great fighter to this day. I mean, Kell Brook hasn't proven what Pacquiao's proven to me. So why would I compare it to De La Hoya and Pacquiao in this situation? You know what I mean? Because Golovkin's comfortable at 160. De La Hoya, to me, wasn't comfortable at welterweight at that point because he hadn't fought at welterweight in years. So that's a piss poor analogy to compare those two. Other guys like Roy Jones Jr. See, you have to know who knows their boxing. He did the same thing. Roy Jones was grossly outweighed by John Ruiz, fought for a heavyweight WBA, I believe, title, and he beat John Ruiz. John Ruiz was solid, but Roy Jones had a lot of God-gifted physical attributes. Like, Ruiz was much slower. Roy Jones was much more athletic, and he beat John Ruiz. And then he dropped back down too fast and got knocked out. But Roy Jones Jr. was one of this generation's freakishly gifted athletes. You know what I'm saying? He had already beaten the likes of James Lights Out Tony, Bernard Hopkins. So what are we talking about? Kell Brook hasn't showed me that. We could talk all day about, I think, in my opinion, I think Kell Brook is one of the very best welterweights. Him, Errol Spence Jr., Keith Thurman, but those guys never scrapped it out. So it's just a thought. I think Kell Brook possibly could beat those guys at welterweight. You know what I mean? I don't know though, because I have to see it, and he hasn't proven that. So we can't give credit before turning in the assignment. But a lot of hypocrisy from Team Triple G. They condemn the Canelo Khan fight, and this fight is really no different. It's another fight that's not meaningful. It's another fight where it doesn't really shape the middleweight division. You go in there and you're supposed to do what you're supposed to do with the guy who's jumping up 2 weight classes. And if you look vulnerable, then it doesn't do you any favors, like Canelo losing the first 4 rounds to Khan, and then finding his timing, his body shots from earlier slowed Khan down, and as soon as Khan, his feet slowed down, what happened? He got knocked out in the 6th round. So I mean, I can't agree with these like circus type of fights that make no sense. And let me further put it in perspective, because EGOVELI is going all the way in and telling you, see, I don't just complain, I tell you guys what I'm complaining about, unlike some people. Now, you look at guys like Floyd Mayweather, and he cannot fight undefeated champions in his own division without those fights being ruled cherry picks, right? Let me repeat that. Floyd Mayweather cannot fight undefeated champions in his division without being called a cherry picker. Danny Garcia. So, Floyd Mayweather, I just did a video. Go read the comments. He is 39 years old, almost 40 years old. He has given 19 years of his life to the sport of boxing as a pro, not to mention his amateur Olympics and all that. 19 years. We know how good Floyd Mayweather is. We don't know how good Kell Brook is. On paper, based on resume. We don't know how good Golovkin is on paper based on resume, because they haven't fought those world beaters like a Floyd or a Pacquiao or whatever. So the point being is, I made a video. Floyd, Danny Garcia, because of the stylistic matchup, you say it's a cherry pick. Garcia is an undefeated champion. He's younger than Floyd. He's a good counterpuncher. He could crack, right? He looked good versus Guerrero, but that's a cherry pick to these delusional fans. They say, oh, it's a cherry pick. A 40-year-old fighting a guy who's much younger, who could crack, who's undefeated, and is a champion, is a cherry pick. So explain this. Because just like Garcia is a champion who's undefeated, so is Kell Brook. But the biggest difference is Mayweather is the smaller of the... When you look at Danny Garcia and you look at Mayweather, Mayweather would be the smaller of the two. Maybe not in height, but body mass index. Mayweather is not younger. He is not the youngest of the two, right? He is not a guy who's being revered as the most devastating welterweight puncher in this current division. Floyd exceeds and excels based on skill. He can fight off the ropes. He can fight on the outside. He's not muscling these guys around and they can't take his power. You know what I'm saying? He's breaking fighters down systematically. Sweet science. So to me, the same can't be said for Golovkin. Golovkin has been muscling guys around. A lot of guys can't cope with his power. He does other things good. He's a good counterpuncher, good balance, nice jab when he wants to use it, things like that. But it is different than a 40-year-old who is fighting guys who are usually younger than him or bigger or both, things of that sort. But Mayweather can't fight Danny Garcia. He can't fight Andre Berto without being a cherry pick. But the most devastating guy, the guy who's perceived as most devastating at middleweight, can fight a welterweight who's a champion. Makes absolutely no sense, right? And what Abel's saying is basically, oh, it's because we have to fight. We have to fight, and we need to preserve this date, and we got to run around with Chris Eubank. I really don't believe that. They're saying it's the same deal, this and that, but a lot of things can happen on the back end. Again, to me, the pot had to be sweet. If a champion is willing to risk everything to fight a guy like a Golovkin, and he's just okay with that. Maybe Chris Eubank was being offered a different lump sum of money in the same pay-per-view structure. I don't know. You know what I mean? Because I know fighters, and sometimes what fighters are said to get through the Nevada State Athletic Commission, I've been told personally that sometimes they get more off the top than what is disclosed to the public. And that's the same thing in the UFC, so it's not just boxing. So I don't know what deal was made. I can't speculate because I don't have an actual figure. But to me, if you can move a welterweight who is a champion with a lot of healthy options out of the welterweight division, and he's going to risk his O to fight Golovkin, then the Chris Eubank deal was feasible. And here's another thing that people are failing to realize. You guys could believe whatever you want. Oh, okay, Eddie Hearn already said it. Eubank's ducked. You can believe that if you want and all that. He was just hooting and hollering. And it happens sometimes when people hoot and holler and they don't really want that work. But there's my question to you. This is my question I really want you guys to answer. Now, Gennady Golovkin versus Chris Eubank. Let's say for whatever reason, the Eubanks really didn't want the fight. They were just doing a lot of talking, using Golovkin's name for promotion and, hey, we're not afraid of you, and things of that sort. Let's say that's what this man was doing. Hypothetically. That still does not answer. That just means Golovkin doesn't have a dance partner because he doesn't really want it, right? So the whole month, or actually longer than a month because I talked about it, I was in Vegas for Canelo versus Khan, and I seen Jesse Vargas, and all the questions were surrounding him fighting Kell Brook, right? And that was way back during the Khan-Canelo fight in Vegas, fight week. So that had to be the first week of May, right? And let's say Chris Eubank really didn't want it for whatever reason. That just leaves Golovkin without a dance partner. So why didn't the Vargas fight pop off? You know what I mean? Why was, if Kell Brook, listen, honestly ask yourself this. If Eubank and the Eubanks price themselves out or they're ducking Golovkin, that's fine. Now Golovkin doesn't have a dance partner. But what happened with Kell Brook, Jesse Vargas? There was nothing indicated that showed that Jesse Vargas had a lack of interest in making that particular fight. I even did a video, or I even have a post about this. So there's nothing that Jesse Vargas has shown that he didn't want to fight Kell Brook. True or false? Like from interviews to anything else. There's nothing he's shown. So why didn't that fight happen? And then Golovkin would just be screwed and have to find somebody else or not fight on that particular date. It just worked all too convenient. Here's Jesse Vargas right now. So this was Jesse Vargas. He's saying, hey, I signed my part of the deal a month ago. I posted this a week ago, right? June 30th. He posted this a month ago. So even if the Eubank, okay, that explains why the Eubank Golovkin fight didn't happen. You guys have to open up and be smarter. You guys just allow people to spoon feed you information. Oh, Hearn said this. Like, you have to analyze, does that make sense? Let's say the Eubanks didn't want to fight. Golovkin is just too much of a monster, or whatever you want to say. That explains why he didn't fight Golovkin, but it doesn't explain the breakup in the Jesse Vargas versus Kell Brook fight. And why would Kell Brook be more willing to jump up 2 weight divisions to fight a guy like Golovkin, who's the most feared or the best middleweight in the world, but he won't fight Jesse Vargas, a guy with losses, right, in his own current division? There's more to the story. So a lot of the boxing fans, they got to start speaking for themselves. Open your third eye and not just be spoon-fed whatever promoters, boxers, or whoever tries to tell you. And it's not making sense. Again, you can explain using that logic why the Chris Bank fight didn't come off. Like, okay, Chris Eubank and his dad, it's them. They didn't want it. So you can account for, if you're using that logic, why that didn't happen. But you cannot explain why Kell Brook was not fighting someone in his division who had been in talks longer than Chris Eubank and Golovkin. So again, the Chris Eubank fight just popping off and like falling off because of logistics. You still haven't explained to me why Jesse Vargas and Kell Brook aren't fighting, and that fight has been talked about longer. So to me, there's more to the story than what is being told with Kell Brook and Eddie Hearn. It just has to be, because you're not explaining why the Jesse Vargas fight didn't happen and why Brook is willing to risk everything. So maybe Brook is a bigger fight with Golovkin and they can generate a bigger sum of money for it, and they're going for the gusto with that because they all stand to make more money. Money talks, you know what I mean? So that could be it. Chris Eubank is probably a higher threat just because it's someone in the division and he's athletic, versus Kell Brook is a guy who's not going to be the favorite because he's coming from welterweight. If they're naturally about the same size, that'd be one thing. If he had experience over 147, that'd be one thing. So to me, Eddie Hearn's story is not adding up. I repeat, is not adding up. And it's merely because you haven't told me how the Jesse Vargas fight fell apart. You know what I mean? Because if anything, Eubank and Eubank Sr. wanting more money, that just ruins it for Golovkin, and he would have been without a dance partner. But Jesse Vargas, why is he not fighting Kell Brook? And all of a sudden, Kell Brook, who, you got to look at it, Kell Brook, since Sean Porter, has gotten a lot of criticism because he hasn't fought no one who is of the note of a Sean Porter or better, right? And all these fights, Brandon Rios, there was gloves issues, and the fights with Diego Chavez, they were signed and then went off. And even before Sean Porter, Devin Alexander, that was supposed to be made multiple times, and then 2 times it was because Kell Brook pulled out, 1 time because Devin Alexander. So 3 failed attempts at the Kell Brook Devin Alexander. Now all of a sudden, Eddie Hearn gives the Eubanks 24-hour notice or whatever, says, hey, call back by 5 p.m. They didn't call back, and miraculously, this mega fight that was never discussed was able to be made in a day or two, 24 to 48 hours. Unbelievable. I do not believe that. I don't care what anybody says. To me, the goal was probably, it was thought about at some point to put this man in there with Gennady Golovkin, period. And this was some kind of side deal. Again, if you guys aren't street smart, you don't know how to look for stuff. It's just like in the movie New Jack City, where G Money was doing a side deal with Ice-T's character, and he was cutting Nino Brown out of the picture, which is in the end why Nino Brown killed his friend G Money. You know what I mean? There sounds like there's some kind of side deal involved here, because I don't understand why Brandon Rios, you guys do your homework. Brandon Rios Kell Brook was a fight talked about last year, and it didn't come off, and it took forever, and there were so many back and forth. You go to ES News, I think, had a lot of coverage with the Robert Garcia, who was training Rios at the time, and that fight couldn't get made for whatever reason. Rios was like, I want it, it's the Kell Brook side, and then Eddie Hearn's like, oh, they want too much money, etc. Just go watch those videos, and that fight never happened. But meanwhile, a Golovkin fight can materialize in a day or two. when they were both in negotiations to fight somebody else. Now, that's my point. I need more answers than that. There's a couple reasons why Kell Brook may have chose this. Maybe he struggles to make weight. I heard he's a pretty big dude. Maybe 147 is becoming harder to make for him. So maybe that's why he's willing to fight Golovkin at middleweight, and he's gonna make a lot of money in this fight because it is a UK pay-per-view. Golovkin has been selling out stateside on the East and West Coast, so maybe there's more money involved. And he's like, you know what, sign me up, because a lot of boxing it's going to this whole notion that, oh, I'm daring to be great. Yeah. So you bite off more than you could chew, then you always have a built-in scapegoat. You know what I mean? Look at Amir Khan versus Canelo. He was like, oh yeah, I couldn't beat Canelo, and he's slow and I'm faster, and like he was saying all this stuff about how he'd win, and who knows, maybe Amir Khan is a natural middleweight, and like he was saying all this stuff about he's a natural middleweight and he was killing himself to make 47, and this is probably his natural weight. And they were even talking about, for whatever reason, Golovkin versus Amir Khan possibly happening, things of that sort, right? And what happens? He gets laid out by Canelo, gets knocked out. What does he say? Oh, I'm going back down to welterweight. This is not my true weight, and all this stuff. So I don't like that in boxing. You know what I mean? It's kind of like a built-in excuse. Golovkin gets no credit for knocking out a welterweight if that's what happens. And Kell Brook, you know what I mean, is just going to always have a built-in excuse. Oh, I dared to be great and jumped up 2 weight divisions. But history repeats itself. And more often than not, the guy who's daring to be great, a lot of times it doesn't pan out. And a lot of fighters I'm noticing, and promoters, and the business model of today's boxing are disrespecting that process. You know what I mean? You think there's a reason there's weight classes. You think you could just avoid, because again, like I said earlier, I don't know if Kell Brook, who he could beat at 154 out of the top crop of guys. I don't know if he could beat the guys who are underneath Golovkin, let alone the guy who's perceived as the best middleweight. You know what I mean? David Lemieux, that would be a tough ass fight for anybody coming up from welterweight. You know what I mean? Just based on size differential only, because there's an old saying, like, a great little man will lose to a good big man, or something like that, or a good big man will beat a great little man, because size does matter, despite what anyone else tells you. So one reason for this is maybe Brook struggling to make weight. Maybe he was tired of the criticism, people saying, oh, I haven't fought nobody since Sean Porter, I'll show them. I'll put at the end of this video, I interviewed Amir Khan, asked him about Kell Brook, and this was way back, this is at the Ward Barrera fight in Oakland in March, late March. And I asked Amir Khan, I said, oh, because this was the rumor back then. Kell Brook said he would fight Golovkin at 57. Now all of a sudden he's willing to go to the full 160. Something had to be in it for him. But anyway, back in March when I interviewed Amir Khan, I specifically asked him, what do you think about Kell Brook saying he'll fight Golovkin? And Khan said it was rubbish. I'll put the clip at the end. He said it was rubbish, it was bullshit. I do not believe him, and he's full of shit and doesn't want to fight nobody. So maybe that's Kell Brook. He's doing like Khan, moving up, like, oh, I'll shut the critics up and biting off more than he can chew. But that's not how this game should be played. To me, I do want to see Kell Brook step up to a Sean Porter type of option or better. You know what I mean? The Keith Thurman, Errol Spence, somebody who's looking great in the division. You know what I mean? Top name, and Danny Garcia, even anybody like that. Vargas, any of those dudes, right? This is not what I necessarily needed. Him jumping up 2 weight divisions. Like, you know what I'm saying? It's like, you have to be able to put your pride aside. Same thing with Golovkin. Yes, I want to see him step up in competition. Kell Brook is a big name and a good fighter, but this is not what I meant. I wanted to see Golovkin fight a Eubank, even a guy like Danny Jacobs or whatever. Some guys are avoiding him, but you're 34 years old. You got to figure it out. You got to figure out, hey, what's next best for my career? Should I fight a welterweight, or should I move up and fight Gilberto Ramirez, who was recently injured, but he wasn't injured until this training camp when he was training for somebody else, because I don't know if Team Triple G really wanted that fight next. You know what I mean? Or even a Laura called you out. See how Brook, I just did the math for you guys. I interviewed Amir Khan in March of this year, asked him about Kell Brook, his rumor about fighting Golovkin, and in March, Khan says, I think it's bullshit, I think he's full of shit, and that was the rumor back in then. And you were able to, Team Triple G and everybody was able to call Kell Brook's bluff, or tried to call, like, find out if he was serious. But Laura's been calling out Golovkin for over a year and a half, but you didn't call his bluff. You know what I mean? Oh, let's see if this guy's really game, if he's really serious. So to me, something backdoor, something was going on behind the scenes with this man and this man, because fights don't just come off in 24 to 48 hours. And if they do, it's not like a fight of this magnitude. You know what I mean? The UFC sometimes does that, but let's say Anderson Silva is a late replacement, or Nate Diaz is a replacement for Conor McGregor, but seldom do you see big boxing events that are being broadcast on US networks like HBO as well as Sky Sports. So there's the international type of fanfare, graphics made, and all types of stuff like this, where it just happens in 24 48 hours, when in the midst of both of the opponents who are now fighting each other being in separate negotiations for separate bouts. There's more to it. So maybe Eddie Hearn worked out a deal, and then Kell Brook is getting an unbelievable amount of money, so he's like, you know what, whatever. But these weight classes need to be respected, you know what I mean? And it's turned into a circus where boxing is I don't know, it's not the same. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I understand daring to be great, but dare to be great, like, this man is clearly great. Like, he's a great fighter, you know what I mean? Dare to be great after you've done something. Like, if Kell Brook beat 2 or 3 solid names at welterweight and then try to dare to be great, like, you know what? I just knocked Errol Spence Jr. out, stopped him dead in his tracks. He got to rebuild his career, and I beat Danny Garcia. If then he wanted to dare to be great and move to 54, move to 160, that would make a little bit of sense, you know what I mean? But fighters were daring to be great, like Amir Khan. Amir Khan dared to be great, and he dared to lay on the canvas because it was too much weight, you know what I'm saying? And Amir Khan only had 3 fights. He had 3 fights with 2 of them being really good performances, Luis Collazo, and then also his performance against Devin Alexander. And then his most recent was the Chris Algieri leading up to the Canelo fight, and he didn't look that great. Took a year off or whatever, then dared to be great, and it just didn't pan out. So that's not what we're expecting from these fighters. And again, it's funny that this man is ridiculed and called a cherry picker all types of way, but imagine if Floyd Mayweather had announced that he was fighting somebody 2 divisions lower than him. Like, let's say they said another champion like Oscar Valdez. He's younger than Floyd, he's a champion, but it's at featherweight. You know what I mean? Imagine if Floyd said, you know what, for my next fight, I'm fighting Oscar Valdez. He's a young, strong champion. Easy work, like I said before. What if he said that? Man, this man would be ridiculed. I said this in this video. Floyd can't even fight undefeated champions in his own division without it being called a cherry pick, like Danny Garcia. He would get bombed on. It's not just Floyd too, but he gets a lot of criticism. Keith Thurman. I don't want to see Keith Thurman versus Oscar Valdez. I don't want to see Keith Thurman versus a 135 pounder. You know what I'm saying? There's weight classes for a reason. Thurman versus Gamboa or something. I don't want to see that. What do I want to see that for? Gamboa is a good fighter, but it's a different ballgame when you start adding a bunch of weight and stuff like that. And you haven't even cleaned out your division. Pacquiao was already starting his reign when he fought De La Hoya. You know what I mean? Go do your research. Kell Brook hasn't done what Pacquiao had done. You know what I'm saying? So it's a different jump when people are making these historic comparisons. Like, you're talking about people who, what they've done at what point, and then they dare to be great. So that's my big thing with this. Dare to be great when it makes sense, when you've already accomplished some things. So you look at Pacquiao. He had already had wars with Marquez by the time he fought Oscar De La Hoya. He had already looked great and sensational versus David Diaz. He had already annihilated Marco Antonio Barrera before, right? Eric Morales. He had already done these things before we even got to De La Hoya, right? That's the big difference. Kell Brook hasn't done that, to me. And I think Kell Brook is truly one of the best welterweights. I like his style. I think he's good, but you still got to prove it. You know what I'm saying? And he hasn't proved all he can, and all that. He hasn't removed all doubts about his welterweight reign to be moving up 2 divisions to fight anybody. You know what I mean? Let alone the number 1 person. So I'm not a fan. I think this is it's a ludicrous match, and I can't really give the winner. I mean, the only way I could give the winner credit is if the winner is Kell Brook, because he's the one that was quote unquote daring to be great. But he's clearly not going in as a favorite, and we'll see. We'll see how he does. Let me know what you guys think. That is my official breakdown of this nonsense Golovkin versus Kell Brook. Just very hypocritical. You bash Canelo. You say, oh, why is he fighting Khan? That's not good for boxing. And now to preserve a date, then you're taking on a welterweight. And it's not even a welterweight with the best resume. You know what I mean? Like, even a Keith Thurman. You look at Keith Thurman, who has a better resume? Keith Thurman fought Diego Chavez, a guy that was supposed to fight Kell Brook, but it fell apart. You know what I mean? He now fought Porter, and you guys have that as a mutual opponent. He beat Guerrero. So, I mean, arguably, I don't even know if it's arguable at this point. I would say Keith Thurman, his resume is probably getting better than a Kell Brook, right? So, these fights like this, these circuits fights for the quick payout, not really a fan of them. And that's just my honest opinion, because I keep it 100. Let me know what you guys think. Golovkin versus Brook. A lot of double standards, a lot of hypocrisy, and it doesn't really prove to me anything. This doesn't put him in the ranks of the Bernard Hopkins and Marvin Hagler. Bernard Hopkins moved up and bypassed a whole division to fight Antonio Tarver at 175. People thought he was going to get killed in that fight. That's not what Golovkin's doing. He's staying where he's already powerful, fighting a welterweight, right? So what does that prove to me if he beats him? That's what you're supposed to do. And again, it's not even just a Golovkin thing. I wouldn't condone this for anyone. Mayweather versus Oscar Valdez or anything like that. Like even a Lomachenko. I don't want to see Lomachenko and Crawford fight. They still have more to prove. Let them acclimate. So again, like Paulie said, weight divisions are not being respected in boxing, and it's becoming the circus. What's next? Chocolatito versus Kovalev, and we're gonna start seeing like just dumbass fights. The Charlo brothers versus Wilder. Like this is getting ridiculous, man. Let me know what you guys think. Drop it in the comment section. Make sure you share the video, like the video as always. Hate, comment, and subscribe. Till next video is Ego signing off.